the argument that is made against his messianic claims by traditional Jews is that if Jesus is the Messiah, you should be able to look out your window and find that the nations all worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I would say that there is a real problem with just taking for granted the world that we're born into, as if, it just must be this way. I say, look out your window. Every year around Passover season, there are thousands of Gentiles who are making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Well, what are they celebrating? Why are Gentiles going to Jerusalem around Passover season? Well, they're celebrating the crucifixion and resurrection of a Jewish figure who claimed to be the Messiah, who they say is crowned as king of the world. That is something which is extraordinary. Look out your window and go drive down the street, and you will find Gentiles praising the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, reading Moses and the prophets.
Incense will be offered to my name.
Yeah,
everywhere. It's across the world. Yeah.
Malachi says, from the rising of the sun to its setting, there will be a pure tribute, and the tribute offering is bread and wine.
Eucharist.
Yeah, exactly. Tribute offering is bread and wine. And from the rising of the sun to its setting, well, Malachi ends with the Son of Righteousness rises with healing in its wings. And this notion of redemption through something which is rising, it's a pun which actually is curiously consistent throughout the scriptures. For example, Isaiah chapter 2 says that the nations will cast away their idols when the Lord rises to terrify the earth. And in that day, the Lord alone will be exalted. Well, that word exalted is used in Isaiah 52:13, the servant of the Lord who is humbled down to the grave and then prolongs his days. It is said that he is high and lifted up. He will be exalted. And then the God of the whole earth will, the God of Abraham, be called, because it is in this person of the servant that the Lord is exalted, and that the nations are inspired to cast away their idols when they're put in, it says they hide in a cave, just like Moses did in Exodus 33 to 34. God puts Moses in the cleft of a rock. He puts his hand over Moses. Moses comes out again. It's a death and resurrection, and his face is radiant with divine glory. And it's because the person sees God as he is, that the person is transformed to share in the life which God has. You become what you worship. Idolaters, they become deaf and blind and dumb because idols cannot see, they cannot hear, they cannot speak. By the same token, a person is glorified when they behold the God of Israel as he is, which is something which transpires in the person of the servant. So I think it's a remarkable fact that these claims of universal kingship and universal dominion, which were made on Jesus's behalf, were made prior to Christianity being anything other than just some backwater cult. They're made in the New Testament makes them, and Christianity is not a large following.
Liberal scholarship didn't do its job in purging the books because there's a bunch of things they overlooked. Like they didn't realize that even if you late date Daniel, it still predicts the the next empire. So it predicts the Roman Empire. It predicts if you late date the Gospel of John, it still says, I will draw all men to myself, right? There's all these predictions about the nations being converted. Messianic prophecies aren't just about the person of Christ himself, it's also about the church. And the church is a huge element when the church is the eschatological reality that's invaded the here and the now, the already not yet that you were talking about earlier. And so I made a big point over the last several years to I usually just sort of fire off this list. And if you're watching, you want to take a few notes, go look at these passages. So you've got Jeremiah 3:14 to 19. You've got Hosea 1:10 to 11, Malachi 1:11 and 12, Habakkuk 2:14, 15, Ezekiel 47:21 to 23, Isaiah 9:1 to 2, Joel 3, Isaiah 11:1 to 10, 19, 18 to 25, 25, 5 to 10, Isaiah 41, 1 to 5, 42, 1 to 10, Psalm 116, Psalm 96, 97, Psalm 107, Psalm 59, 9 to 10, Psalm 65, 8, all of Psalm 66 and 67, Psalm 71, 8 through 11, 17 to 18, Psalm 81, 8, Psalm 85, 8, Psalm 95, 3. Some of these might be Masoretic text, by the way, as opposed to Septuagint. Psalm 17/18, depending on which text you're reading. Psalm 44, 50, Psalm 22, 28 to 29, Zechariah 2:15, Micah 4, 1 through 4, Zechariah 8, 21 to 23, Tobit 13:13, Tobit 14:5-7. There's a bunch more, but point being is that the Jeremiah 25:18, Jeremiah 16:19-21, Jeremiah 38:31-34. Those are all texts specifically, and we could even go back to the Abrahamic covenant, right? Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22, all predictions of the nations. The seed will be like the sand of the sea, like the stars, right? So it'll be this gigantic number of people. All of these texts are saying a multitude that no one could number, right? And that's what we see in the apocalypse of the redeemed, is a number that no one can number. I wanted to just mention a couple things in the Psalms, because there's so many powerful prophetic elements in the Psalms. So we've touched on a lot of the prophetic things that relate to not just Christ, but also the church, also 70 AD, important redemptive historical events. We've got eschatological events yet to come, right? Bodily resurrection, right? The eschaton, etc. In the fullest sense, and the eschaton is here in an already not yet sense. But when I go to the Psalms now, it's just so I've been reading the Psalms for 20 years, but it seems like only in the last few years, even though I knew there was prophetic references to Christ, and there was typology in the Psalms for back when I was a Calvinist. Now when I read the Psalms, it just is, I don't know, it's just because of, I think, the saturation aspect of the the Orthodox liturgy. When I read the Psalms now, it's just every psalm is just totally screaming Christ and the church to me now, more so than it ever has in the past. And so when you go and you see, and I think it has to do with the fact that in the New Testament we have the statement that it was the Spirit of Christ who spoke in all of those Old Testament prophets. So it's literally the voice of Christ. That's again, I think, a conditioner for our doctrine of inspiration. No prophet spoke of his own will, but holy men moved by the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Christ. So when we see the nations are raging in Psalm 2, right away we can say that they've all positioned themselves against the Lord and his anointed. It's not just David, it's David speaking, as the New Testament argues in Acts 2 and Acts 13. The Lord said to my Lord, right? Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. That's Psalm 110, but I'm saying that in Psalm 2, it's over his holy hill of Zion, the Lord has decreed. The Lord said, you are my son, today I've begotten you. I will give you, ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession. That's talking about the ascension of Christ and his session and dominion that is given to him, like David, like Adam, to have his name and his honor and his worship throughout the entire world, including the Gentile nations. So here we have a prediction of not just the nations, and particularly the Romans and the Jews, gathered in Israel to go against the Lord at his crucifixion, but we have him being set upon all, above every name, and the whole ends of the earth given to him as his dominion. So we have basically the entirety of Christ in Psalm 2, right? His crucifixion and his ascension, and being given the dominion over the whole nations of the Gentile church.
Yeah, it's interesting. The book of Psalms is written in the immediate context of the tabernacle of David. So David, when he becomes king over the whole 12 tribes, he brings the Ark of the Covenant to Mount Zion. And this is the only sanctuary in the history of Israel which actually dwells on Mount Zion. So the temple is built on Mount Moriah. This is the sanctuary that is on Zion. And the prophets consistently identify Zion as the archetype of the Messianic era, because there are several unique characteristics for this Davidic sanctuary. So David, the Ark of the Covenant is naked, as it were. It's right in front of you. It's not concealed behind veils. David sits right before the Ark of the Covenant. So I think this relates, Lord says, my Lord, sit at my right hand. David is sitting in the presence of God. The Gentiles are given an unprecedented degree of participation in the Davidic sanctuary. When David speaks of the Lord's temple in the book of Psalms, I think he's speaking about the Ark of the Covenant as it's dwelling on Mount Zion. So Isaiah says the nations will go to Zion to seek the word of God. And I want to build on what you said about the ends of the earth, because Zechariah 9, this is the evangelists quote this concerning Jesus's triumphal entry, which, by the way, is a recapitulation of David's bringing the Ark of the Covenant up to Zion. It said, sing and rejoice, O daughter Zion, or daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous, having salvation. See, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, the war horse from Jerusalem. The battle bow shall be cut off. He shall speak peace to the nations. His rule should be from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. So this phrase right here, from the river to the ends of the earth, it starts the way that God's promise to Abraham starts out, Genesis 15. It's from one river to another, but this time it's from the river to the ends of the earth. And Zechariah, in this prophecy of the coming of the Messiah, because this is a very clear allusion to Genesis 49, which speaks about a donkey and a colt. Well, Zechariah combines this allusion to the coming of the Messianic king in Genesis 49 with something he said earlier in Zechariah 2. Zechariah 2, verse 10, sing and rejoice, O daughter Zion, for behold, I come. This is God speaking. I come. I will dwell in your midst, declares the Lord, and many nations shall join themselves to the Lord in that day and shall be my people. So the coming of the Lord, the coming of the king, same thing. They're tied together. These two threads are wrapped together in one event. Isaiah 63 does the same precise thing. It combines Genesis chapter 49 and Judges chapter 5. Genesis 49 speaking about the coming of the Messianic king. Judges chapter 5 speaking about the coming of the God of Israel. So these threads are consistently wrapped and tied together, because Isaiah 53, the suffering servant is high and lifted up. And that phrase was last used, in fact, it's only used in Isaiah, it's used 3 times. It was last used in Isaiah chapter 6, where I saw the Lord sitting on his throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Well, the Lord is sitting on his throne. His throne is in the sanctuary, and that is the palace of God, which is imaged in the palace of the Davidic king. So here the suffering servant, he is exalted, he is enthroned, and he therefore builds the sanctuary of Zion in his death and resurrection, because it's in this context. It says, he shall sprinkle many nations.
Yeah.
This is the high priest. He's sprinkling the nations. He's bringing them in. The Lord said, my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make enemies your footstool. The footstool, this is something which is this is the Ark of the Covenant. It's something which has this kind of double meaning.
I never even thought about that Moses sprinkled the book and the people. So he sprinkled a nation. The Messiah sprinkles, as the new Moses, many nations.
Yeah, and he does it in the Eucharist, which is exactly that event which gathers the church into one body. So the church is gathered into one through the Eucharist. Daniel 9 says that in the midst of the 70th week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the tribute of the old covenant to cease. Well, right. Sacrifice is the sacrificial meal. Tribute is the bread and wine. And I think this is specifically referring to the institution of the Eucharist in AD 70. I want to mention something really cool in the book of Daniel, because Daniel chapter 9, 70 weeks, it's there's 7 weeks, and then there's 62 weeks, and the 70th week is the week when God fulfills all of his covenantal promises. So the 62 weeks, it's after this period of 7 plus 62 that the Messianic ministry comes. I think it begins at 27, ends in 33, or comes to its climax in 33 with the beginning of the Gentile mission. But Daniel says something really fascinating in Daniel chapter 6. This is where Daniel is thrown in the pit, and then he's brought out again. It says that Cyrus, or Darius, I think the same, these are 2 thrown names for one figure, was about 62 years old. Now, I could understand if he said about 60. But about 62, why say 62? If he was exactly 62, you can just say 62. But why about 62? It's because Daniel is linking what's happening here when he's thrown in the lion's den and brought out again with what happens after the 62nd week. 7 plus 62. The 70th week is the confirmation of the covenant. Daniel, his going into the pit and being brought out again, is a sign of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Because Daniel is a new Joseph. Lots of stuff connects Daniel with Joseph. So Joseph goes into a pit, he's brought out again, enlightens the nation.
In the first century, Christianity was this tiny unknown sect. And yet we have books saying that the entire world will call Mary blessed and Theotokos.
Yeah, it's astonishing. And when people say, look out your window, if the Messiah came, well, we should see it out our window. I mean, hello, I'm descended from some like barbarian tribe in like, Western Europe? Why am I talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why are the scriptures of Israel so central to the way I think about the world?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
what does this have to do with even traditional Jews have to find some way to explain the existence of Christianity, which is why you even get very anti-Christian Jews saying that in some strange way it's an aspect of the providence of God. But yeah, I think it's just much simpler to speak about Jesus as he's the one who does what was always promised concerning the Messiah.